chat. There's other guys that can be answering while the presentations are going on. We also have the ability to do breakout rooms, and those will become more important as the Zoom room gets busier. There's always somebody here, almost 24/7, all the time. So if you have any problems or any questions, xLights or hardware related or troubleshooting you need help with, drop into the Zoom room. It's not just Wednesday night; it's any night of the any night, any day, any night. There's probably somebody here to help you. So getting started. First things first. xLights. Hopefully you've already got the software downloaded, but I'm going to just state the obvious. You go to the download section in xLights. You can download the 64-bit for Windows. You can go to the Apple Store to get it for the Macintosh. Pretty basic stuff. It's like any other Windows program. You click it and install it. Before we can start xLights for the first time, we always should talk about the show folder. Show folder is what xLights uses to store and arrange all of the contents that it needs to run your program. I'm going to keep it simple tonight. There's lots of opinions. There's lots of, there's almost nothing can go wrong in terms of where you decide to put it. But I'm going to keep things simple. I'm just going to place it on the desktop. The caveat being that it might be a little easy to delete because, it gets in all of these things. You're like, what is that? You hit delete. So if you put it on your desktop, just be aware that don't go deleting it afterwards or deleting it by mistake. So normally we call it something simple. Again, there's lots of different ideas about this, but we can call it show folder. We might call it xLights. We could call it something else. Other options would be, if you decide to store it by year, you can say 2022. And then inside your 2022, you would create a new show folder called show folder. Sooner or later, maybe. New folder. Come on. It's not liking me. So you can create a new show folder. If you're doing multiple shows, again, I don't want to get too complicated. You might even go in here and call it Christmas or Halloween or something like that. But for tonight, we're just going to go with show folder. That's nice and simple. I'm going to go with that and delete that. So starting up xLights, first time you start up xLights, it's going to say, where is my show folder? Give me a second for that. As you can see, it's 2022.15. That's the latest release. As releases comes out, it should prompt you and say, hey, there's a new version coming out. Feel free to update as much as you can. As you get closer to your show, time for show, you might hold off updating. But with xLights, if you find a serious bug in the version that you've upgraded to, it's pretty simple to go back to a previous version, especially if you just keep the previous version on your hard drive somewhere. You just reinstall it and let you go. So it's opened up xLights. It says, give me my show folder. So we're going to point to my show folder here and say, go ahead. You want to keep your naming convention fairly consistent, fairly short. Don't make lots of long-winded folder names. There are some limitations in Windows. So try to keep it short, but keep it, something that you can understand. First time in, it's going to ask you to give it an email address to help for bug reports. You can just say no thanks to that. Another window open in the background here that I'm just going to quickly address. This is the tips, tools of the day, tip of the day. You can turn that off, or you can do something is, you can minimize it, make it a little smaller so it remembers it next time in. It'll remember and show you one next time. I'm going to turn it off for tonight's presentation so that we don't have to get bugged by that each time. So here's the show folder. We created a show folder. Tonight's going to be all about the layout. We're not going to worry about buying a controller or placing a controller. We're not going to worry about creating sequences or anything like that. We're going to worry about the layout. The layout is what props you're going to have in your show, or what props you might put in your show. You don't have to actually own all these props when you put them in there. They could be something that you would like to try out an idea. Think grand. You might say, oh, maybe if I win the lottery, I'll put all this in. And maybe if I, maybe I'll do a 3-year plan. There's no harm in adding those props now. It's actually probably better to add some of these things now rather than adding it next year and having to go back through all your sequences. So if you've got an idea that you're going to do something, no harm in putting it in right away. All right, so we're looking at a blank page right now. So the first things we're probably going to do is actually give it a picture of your house. We could start adding models now without a house, but it probably has more meaning if you have a house on there to draw. So I'm just going to minimize this for a second. I grabbed an image, hopefully it's still sitting here, just of a neighbor's house, and maybe I don't even have it here. I thought I hit, oh yes, I did. So there's the house. I'm going to drop that in the show folder. Remember I talked about keeping everything nice and neat in your show folder? So I've placed the house picture in there. Once we started up xLights, it created these folders for us. Let's go ahead and create just a couple folders that we know we're going to need in the near future here. So I'm going to create a new folder. Is it going to let, it's done? It's almost like it's not letting me do this. Maybe I have to do a new folder here. And if anybody sees what I'm doing wrong, why is it not letting me create a new folder? New.
Turn your record off.
What's that?
Your record off.
I don't get you, Jay. Sorry. Oh.
Try to view refresh, and maybe it's kind of creating the background. It just didn't refresh or something. Maybe
I do not know.
hit F5. Hit F5 on the keyboard.
Oh, you're right. What the heck's going on? Interesting. All right,
Yeah,
so I'm going to create.
Refreshing. Yeah.
I'm going to create one called audio. You might call it music, for example. Oh, you're right. Look at that. It's not refreshing my screen. That's very interesting. Some other ones might be. What else do we thought? Video. So if you're going to bring in some videos, you might have another one for imported sequences. So like purchase sequences. So I'm going to just go back and create one called and rename this. And even that's kind of long-winded, but we'll go with that for now. These are the basics you'd create. As you get better, as you get into sequencing, you might create other folders to keep things organized, but this is like a concise list of what you need right now to get going. So we'll go with that. I'm not going to touch on sequencing at all in this presentation. It's all about the layout. So I'm not going to delve too much into those pieces. So we've added the picture. I'm going to place it on my xLights. So I'm going to go back in here and choose the house. And hopefully it shows up. There we go. And we say fill up my screen. It chooses the width and height for that house. So it's pretty much ready to go. A little bit about a house. You want to try to get straight on as much as you can. You want to include as much of the yard as you can. Try not to get any funky angles unless that's really how you want to sequence it. But ideally, you're trying to get as straight on as possible. Google Maps Street View works well. Otherwise, you can do it from a camera, I suppose, if you can get a nice panoramic shot. But ideally, keep a straight line, keep it at a good distance, at a viewer's distance should work for you. I'm going to touch briefly on 3D. You're not going to go into 3D. 3D is an option where if you could place your props and you would place them in different spots on your property in 3D space. We're only going to do it through 2D because it's just getting you started. Probably where most people are going to start is doing it in a 2D setup. More advanced you get into, you do a 3D setup. In terms of sequencing and the results of your sequencing, there's really not much difference. It's really just a way to space out your props, especially if you get a lot of things in your front yard or a lot of layering in your house. It's easier to drop in the props. So we have our house. We're all good. We're going to start actually doing, before we start adding the models and props, I just want to quickly go through the preferences before we set things up. I want to go to preferences. And I'm just going to quickly walk through if there's anything here that we should be concerned about. Most of the defaults are set pretty good for us right off the install. So we don't really have to touch anything. Backup on launch, it's going to back up just the sequences, not the media, not the images, not the music. It's only the sequences. So be aware of that. It's not foolproof. It's also going to back up your layout and your controller setups. If you want to back up all of that, your images and sequences and videos, music, you really have to do that by yourself outside of xLights. It's not going to back that up. So there's really nothing I need to change here. The view, this is how you can change the sizes of the icons. If you need to do anything like that, that's available there. Shouldn't have to change anything. This is on the sequencer, changing it for your monitor. If you have a big screen, you might need to make it a little larger. You shouldn't have to change anything else there. Sequences. I'm not really going to touch on this, but this is something you're wanting to take a look at once you get into sequencing and setting up your views. We'll touch on that just before the end of this class. Output, don't need anything there. And other, I think the defaults are set now for these two tabs. We used to have people coming in here and we had to have them set that up. Don't need to do that. It's already preset. This is just for convenience, again, on the controllers and such. This was the tool tip of the day that I turned off at the beginning. If you decide you want to turn it back on, you can turn it back on and you can say what levels of tips you want it to show. So out of the gate, we don't have to change any preferences. Everything looks good. I just wanted to double check that. So that's all good. We got this. That's good. And okay, I think we're ready to start some basic modeling. These are the different props that you can place on your house. I'm going to start with the very simple, a single line. If you click it once, it's going to let you draw a single line prop. Notice there's a green and a blue. Convention has it with xLights that you should always draw green at the bottom, blue at the top, green at the, let me draw another one, green at the left, blue at the right. The green at the left and blue at the right is really important to xLights. The other one from bottom to the top is more of a convention. It's not as critical as the left to right one. That's what we find. If you do a bars effect, for example, which is rolling colors, it's always going to go from left to right, and you're going to have props that are inconsistent. So if you've got your layout that you've been working on prior to tonight's class, go back and take a look at your props. See if you got that green square at the left and the blue at the right, the green at the bottom, blue at the top, wherever you can do that. Some props you can't do that because they're a circle or whatever, so obviously it doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to quickly draw a few single lines just to show you what can be done. If you click it once, you draw one. If you click it twice, it's going to keep on adding single lines until you're done, until you turn it off. So I'm just going to draw a single line there, top to bottom. I'm going to draw a vertical here. I'm going to draw another vertical here. And I'm going to draw one off the side here if I can. Oops, I'm going to turn that off for a second. I think I got an extra one there. Delete that. And which one is this one? Delete that one. All right. I'm deleting it by just pressing the delete key. So I'm going to draw one more. Probably not the best thing, but I'm going to pretend like that's off the side of the driveway. Going to draw a couple across our eaves, left to right again. And I'm going to draw that one more over here. Those are all single lines. I'm going to come back and address these single lines here in a second. I'm going to turn off the single line. I'm going to do a polyline. The polyline is like a multi-part single line. So we click to start it, click to get to the middle one, and click to come down. And we hit the escape key to stop that polyline. Polylines are similar to single lines. In fact, but they sort of assume that you're going to have one controller connection to this polyline. If you're going to connect two different connections to this polyline, probably best to draw it as two single lines. But if you know for sure that it's going to be a single connection back to your controller, might as well keep the number of models reduced by just drawing as a single polyline. Going to address a little bit here on people who have soffits and such that sort of jump out at me. You see how this corner of the house is so close to me? If you draw it a single line, you're going to draw it, you're going to have to sort of fake it. Often we'll just draw it like this. It doesn't go against the house image, but it's there to represent that set of lines that goes from the front of the house back to the corner of the house. So those are single lines and polylines. And I'm just going to go back through the list now here. So I'm going to click the first polyline. You'll notice that it created a prop called polyline. We're going to want to name these something that's meaningful to you rather than polyline. You're going to try to be a little bit OCD, a little bit keeping care of how you call things and consistent. So this might be garage door, or garage roof line, something like that. What you choose here is kind of important because once you start sequencing, it gets really tricky to change the names later. So it's best to come up with good, consistent naming, check your spelling, check the uppercase and lowercase, make sure it's all good. Number of nodes. So we've drawn this polyline here, this 2-piece line here, and we're saying it's 50 nodes. You can change these numbers right up to like literally the day of the show if you have to. If you found that you've put on the prop later on when you bought this and you realize it's 98 and you had 50 in here, it's really just put in 98 and you're ready to go. So don't worry too much about what number you put in there. Just have something that sort of represents what you're going to have. Lights per node, I'll touch on it really briefly. That is when you have a number of little LEDs that make up a single pixel. Think of those strips. They actually have like 3 little lights that make up 1 pixel. So that's really just for visual. So we're not going to worry too much about that. Strings, look at the little tooltip. This is one of the biggest comments we get is, what is the strings? Strings are actually a number of port connections you have. I'm not going to get into controllers tonight. So we'll just leave it at 1. We'll assume it's only 1 controller connection. Again, it doesn't impact how you sequence it, how you set it up. So just leave it as 1 is fine. Same with this starting location. This is where you're going to connect the controller. We're not, again, worrying about controllers. So if we could say it's at the green square, but maybe when we get the controller and we figure out where we're going to put it, we may decide that it's actually going to be on the blue square, which is the opposite end. It's just as simple as clicking it. So that's a decision you can make at a later time. Once you get all the props on your house, you say, okay, now I'm going to figure out where do I want to put the controller? What makes the most sense? That discussion can come later. It's as simple as changing this little drop down. So don't fret it. It's simple enough to do. An added property for a polyline, because we have 2 lines, the left side and the right side, you have individual segments. So we have the left side and the right side. So here's how you would say, oh, I've actually got 48 on this side and 47 on the other side. So that's where that's done right there. You can say that you can make up for the different values. The rest of that doesn't matter. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not important for setting up your layout. So the other polyline, just going to quickly put in, what is this? Doorway, eaves. Something simple. We're going to leave it at 50. We're going to leave the strings as 1. We're going to say it starts with the green. So we don't have to change anything there. Again, uppercase, lowercase, nice consistent naming, maybe making sure that we use garage whenever we need to, or doorway whenever it's appropriate. This single line lights up over here in the yellow. It is a driveway. I'm going to say driveway left. Hopefully I've got my lefts and right. And this is basically what we covered on a polyline. I'm going to leave it at 50. At some point, we can come back and say it's 75. We can come back and say it's 20. That's really irrelevant. For your layout stuff, you can figure out later how many it might be, but you can go with 50 for now. The front single line, that is going to be, I don't know, front yard, or front border maybe, or yard border. How about yard border? How do you spell border? With an A or without? Depends if you're American or Canadian, I think. Single line, I'm going to say that is house vertical left. Notice I'm going to put house first, vertical, and then left at the end. The reason I do that, okay, house vertical left. First of all, I got to remember that you have to hit tab or enter. There we go, for it to take it. House vertical left, because when I come over to this guy, I'm going to say he is house vertical right. And then you'll see how it all sorts nicely together. You got your house verticals together. It's not, it just comes in the proper order and makes things easier sort and keep things together. This would be roof, eaves, left, tab, and I'm going to go to the next one. What else we got? This is driveway, right. And this one here, it'd be roof, eaves, right. While you're playing with this, before you start sequencing, you can always rename these or change the names. Like I said, you can change them later on, but it will impact any sequencing you've done. It will think, hey, that model isn't there. Where did it go? And you're going to have to clean up some stuff. So just work as you can. This is going to say garage, eaves, right. There you go. And we got one left, and I don't even know what I would call that. Roof center. I don't know. Whatever you call it. I haven't got one of those, so I don't know what it is. It's not 50 pixels. Let's say it's just 10. What we have there. So there's very basic props, single line, polyline. Those are the couple of basic ones. Let's go on and do a mega tree. So we assume we've got a tree. I click on the tree here. It should work that I just click on the first and drag it down. All right. If you look closely, you can see there's a green dot right there. That indicates where the first pixel would be. So where you would basically start your tree. But ideally you click from the top down to the right and it will put the prop in the proper direction. Don't spin it around. Don't flip it. Don't do things like this. xLights doesn't like that. Keep the models properly in place. I'll show you on another prop later on how that can get messed up, and we'll look at that, especially with arches. Trees, doing a pixel trees, one of the biggest things that people get mixed up on is number of strings. Again, the tooltip comes up, it says this is typically the number of connections. So don't think of this as the number of lines on a tree. You could conceivably use 16 connections to a controller, but you don't need to, you don't have to. It's kind of a waste to do that. You might have something simpler like 8 or 4 or 2 or 1, depending on how big they are. But we'll go with half of this just to make it easier. So there's 8 connections. If you notice when I hit the tab, we're going to lose half the tree. But now on each one of those connections, we no longer have 50 pixels. We actually have 100. We're doubling them up. And then now we've got 8 at 100. Now we're going to actually say go up and down. So that's called strands per string. And there we are. We're back to what we had before. We have 16 strands going up and down for a total of 800 pixels. So it's the same as we had before. There's a mega tree. You can try to size it appropriately. Usually it's like 2 to 1, 2 times the height, 1 times across the base, something like that looks good. These numbers again can change quite easily after you've started pushing your pixels and looking at dimensions and size. You can sequence to this tree the way it stands now, and it really doesn't impact you later on if you decide to change the pixel count. Try to keep things consistent in terms of 2, 4, 6, 8 for connections. Keep your pixel counts somewhat uniform. 50s, 100s, 75s are good because that's usually when you're buying pixels. They usually come in those kinds of units. So don't make it hard on yourself by choosing like obscure numbers. 43 pixels up and 43 pixels down. That just doesn't make any sense. Let's throw a star on top. Again, clicking up here and dragging to the right. Down and to the right. I'm going to drop them on there. Quick thing about star, I'm going to call it mega tree star. Star. Should go back here. I'm just going to, while I'm here, I'm just going to call that mega tree. And now back to the star. So we have a star. This is what they call a built-in model for a star, which probably handles almost 90% of all the stars you can purchase from a vendor out there. There are some exceptions where you might use a downloaded model, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But this is pretty much what you should be able to use for almost all the stars you get out there. It may look different right now because this one only has one layer to a star, but you might buy a star that's got, say, 3 layers. That means 3 stars going around and around. And so I said 3 stars. I expanded out, and we can say that the first star is 20 pixels. The next star would be 30 pixels, and the next one's 40 pixels. So you see how that looks now. I'm going to make it really big. Hopefully you can see it. There we go. So there's, let me make it so you can see what it is. There's 3 separate layers. There's like an outer star, an inner star, and then a little star in beside. So that's 3. Some vendors have got 6 layered stars, and 6 and 3 are pretty common. And 1 is obviously very common, very simple to put together. Nodes per string, it calculated that based on the 20, 30, and 40, so we didn't have to touch that. How many points are in the star? That's kind of obvious. Starting location, these things can all be changed right up to, you know, the day before showtime if you really wanted to. But this is where is the first pixel going to start? See, there's a little green dot, tells you where that is. So that value can be changed whenever you need to. Based, once you have the prop in your hand and you decide how you're going to push the pixels, you can make those changes. Nothing else here is that critical, so I'm not going to touch on that. And is there any questions? I know I'm whipping through this, trying to.
There's a couple in chat. Matt R. I've been watching that. Matt R. was asking about, can you reverse one that's flipped? I think he was referring to like the green and blue squares, like if you drew it backwards.
Yep. So if this was backwards, you know, the easiest way is really just grab a corner and bring it over and bring it back. Boom, done. So it's really that simple. If you get a polyline, same thing with a polyline. If this was flipped, it's a little trickier, but I think you can still do it. You literally bring it over and bring it over. It's not that hard. You could find, I know I did 3 years after my first show, I realized I had some things backwards. So you may find these things hiding in your layout. And you discover them only when you're watching your display outside your house, because you may not realize it in xLights that you've got things backwards, and there's only certain effects will show up incorrectly. So you could literally go a couple of seasons and not realize what you've done. But it's that easy to move it around. I would suggest moving it around. Other options, and I don't want to get too tricky here, is you could draw that prop again, and then there's an option to replace one model with the other model if it's really that complicated. You can do that.
Daryl, there was another question there that talked about connection to controllers, and does the green spot matter? So if the controller is here, does it matter? So they have wire length runs or whatever?
Yeah, for this presentation, it doesn't matter. Green and blue, when you decide to hook up your controller and decide where you're going to place it, this is where you're going to decide where the controller connection is. Always draw it the same way as I've been telling you. Green on the left, blue on the right, green on the bottom, blue on the top. Always draw it that way. When you decide to figure out where your controller is going to connect, you come in here and you decide on this property here called starting location. So as far as controllers connections are concerned, you do it all through that property.
Yeah. So just to be clear, you could wire a prop from your controller here or here. It doesn't matter. It's controlled from that point.
Correct.
You always want to do your layout left to right on your polylines.
Yeah. Consistency. If you've got them all drawn bottom to top to bottom, stick with it. Left to right, fix it.
Okay.
That would be my 2 cents there. Yep.
Rob had also made a comment about turning down the brightness on the image of your house. So you might go over how you would do that as well.
Yep. If you click on just the image of your house, notice I just clicked on the grass here. It brings you back to the properties where we defined the house. There is a brightness here, especially when you're sequencing, you're going to want to turn down the brightness of your house so you can see the colors. I didn't want to make it too hard for you guys to see in the Zoom room, but you could bring it down to 50%. That's probably a little more important when you are working on the sequencing aspect of it. I don't know. Can you guys see the white? I can see the white on the house fine with me.
At 50%, it was much easier to see the models.
Okay, I will crank it down to 50. All right, there you go. So there you go. So I've covered the polylines, the single lines, the mega tree, the star. The star looks huge to the tree, but we'll, whatever. We can just make it smaller. That's good. Again, I'm just going to draw another common, I don't know if it's a mistake, but it's a common problem that people have is the mini trees from a certain vendor. Oops. Let me just delete. Oh, there it goes. It was just having a little snooze. The mini trees that we see, those often, I think they're 12 strands of something. Ideally, you can find it out on the vendor's website, tells you how big they are, but they are often one controller connection. And I think there's something like 120 pixels total, and there's 12 strands. So it's 12 up and downs and making up 120. So that's a common mini tree that is out there. That's a 360. If it's only 180, you bought half a tree. It's something like that. It's really 180. Maybe it's going to be maybe half the number of strands. It's really quite simple to change. You can still, again, sequence with what you think you're going to buy. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning of the class, you may not have these yet, but you might want to put them in your show now to see what it's going to look like, to impress the wife, to say, this is what we could have. Do you want to open up the wallet a little more? If we don't do this, this is what it's going to look like. It doesn't cost anything to draw it on your show. Another trick I'm going to show you here. We've drawn the one tree. I'm going to call it mini tree. And I'm going to do a Control C. It's typical Windows, Control C, and then going to Control V, which is a paste. We got a second mini tree right there. And I'm going to do it one more time. 3. Now I'm going to suggest you actually go back. So notice how it says -2, -3. I'm going to suggest you go back, and for consistency and a little bit of OCD, call that mini tree 1, 1, 2, 3. You could even do left, center, right. Maybe not so important here with something like mini trees, but 1, 2, 3. Groups of 4. It's a Tom Betgeorge thing. He's one of the bigger sequencer. He likes to do things in groups of 4. If you're considering doing things, you'd have 4 mini trees, 4, 8, etc. That is a basic mini tree you can get from a vendor. If it's a tree that people get, a classic example is you wrap pixels around a tomato cage, and it's a spiral tree. You can say how many times does it wrap around the tree, and I think I can do it here. I'm going to see. It kind of doesn't look right, but this is what spiral wraps are. Not really seeing too many spiral trees anymore. There it is there. You can see that it goes around the tree a number of times. So that's another option there. I'm going to put that back to 0 and make him the same. So there's different types of trees. There's not, it's a built-in model. Again, sometimes you will get it through a custom model, and I'll touch on that in just a second.
Daryl, why is naming convention so important?
Well, you want to have it named properly so that you can sort things and find things later on. It's better to have it corrected now than fixing it later. I don't know. Is there anything else I'm missing? That's really, it's
also,
really,
if you have like single line 1, single line 2,
Yeah,
single
you
line 3, which line is it? So
Yeah.
naming them like left garage vertical or something like that, that makes
Yeah.
more sense to what it is.
yeah, because you're not always going to see your stuff with a layout like this. You're going to be working in the sequencer, and all you're going to have is this list of names, and it's not going to make a lot of sense to you. So it's going to be kind of important. So those are some of the key props. I'm going to add at least a couple more here. This is a matrix. This matrix could be a projector, it could be a TV, it could be a pixel matrix. When we talk about a pixel matrix, we literally mean that. It's a mesh of product, either from Home Depot or various Coro vendors, and you're pushing the pixels into it. Again, drawing left to right, bottom, pulling it down and dragging it. Matrix, same thing I mentioned before. Number of strings is the number of port connections. I'm going to just say it's set to 1. There's going to be all in one port connection, and we're going to say it's 50, and we're going to say there's 5. I think that should work to be, so just a simple pixel matrix. These numbers you can change again. I've mentioned I'm like repeating it over and over again. You can change these values later on as you get things purchased, or as you get the specs from the products that you're looking at. You have a matrix. I want to touch on right-clicking this matrix here. Right-click and go to Node Layout, and it will tell you a little bit about this matrix. I just want to quickly touch on this. It's starting at the top left. It says Node 1, port 1, string 1, port 1, same thing. And it's going to Node 2, Node 3, Node 4. As you can see, it's going from this top to the right, down, back, down, back, down, back, down, and over. So if you were to purchase a product like, or purchase this prop, you would know how to wire it based on this. And I could show you the wiring diagram, but it gets a little confusing. If you can read this, you might be better off understanding it. You can see that it's going back and forth, left to right, and from the top down. For our purposes, that's good enough. If you decide later on that that's not how you plan on wiring it, that's fine. You could just come back here and say, you know what, I'm going to go up and down when I wire it, and I'm going to start at the bottom left. So just a few clicks, and you'll see that it is Node Layout. Hopefully, if I'm on the right thing, Node Layout, you should see that now it's going up and down, and it's starting on the bottom left. I didn't change, I probably should have changed the strands per string, because now it's really 5 across and 10 up, whereas before it was 10 across and 5 up. That would mean changing this to be a 10, right? Now it looks properly, same as what I had before. Simple enough to change. If you decided that you want to change the number of pixels, change the size, you decided to go with 3-inch, 2-inch, or 1-inch spacing, etc., easy enough to change at a later time. Again, I repeat, do not do weird things as much as possible in terms of, oh, I'm going to use a pixel matrix, but on the very last row, I'm going to use only 5 pixels because that's all I got left. You're just causing yourself a lot of hurt. It can be done. xLights is very flexible, but try to be consistent. Try to keep an eye on nice, even numbers so that you have a pixel count that's going to work with the number of nodes and number of strands. While I'm here, I'm going to show another trick here. You could lock that matrix in place. You can do that with any of these props. That just stops you from inadvertently clicking it, dragging it, moving it. You'll notice it turned red. So I just drop that little hint in there. And a couple of other props before we move on. Arches. There we go. Arches kind of look funny, but yeah, there we go. Don't go twisting that stuff. It probably doesn't make a big impact, but you shouldn't need to. You just want to grab the arch and move them into place. And there you go. And I'm going to go Control C, going to paste another one in there, right? And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to go back here. Just going to be a little OCD. Call that arches 1. So we have arches 1 and arches 2. Layered arches. That's if you got those triple arches where there's actually 3 lights in a row. That's a purchase product. This is which normally would be like a PEX arch, often filled with the light strip. There's really nothing else you need to change here. Notice the green square is on the left, blue is on the right. If you decide to hook them up differently, you could just change the green square, blue square. So simple as that. And one last group of models, very important. These are all what we call like built-in models. And there's a few others that we didn't even cover off here, but these are all the built-in models. There are a whole bunch of custom models, which seems to be the trend now, going to your local Coro vendors and picking up cool looking props, either plopping them in your display. They're normally done with the download button here, which means it's going to go out to the internet and grab the latest catalogs from the preferred vendors. I guess I don't know if they're preferred vendors, but they're vendors that are teamed up or are partnered up with xLights to be included. Again, clicking on this spot, dragging to the right, it's going to go grab the downloads of all of the vendors, bring up a list. And here are all the vendors. You could search at the bottom. I'm just going to go with the classic candy cane, the classic candy cane that gives everybody problems for some reason. I'll drop it in there. There's a 99 pixel candy cane. Yes, you should cut the 100th pixel off of your prop. You don't have to, but that's a very common question. Another common question is, how come this candy canes go to the left? I want it to go to the right. Don't go grabbing this and flipping it over. Never do that. There's always a better way. There's always the right way. And that is to come to the model data, click on the triple dots, right click in here, and I'll probably get it wrong, but I think it's horizontal flip. Did I get it right? Yes, I think I did. And click OK. There you go. You've got your right flipped candy cane. I'll place them over here and Control C, Control V, Control V. And I am going to, no offense to Boscoyo, but that's a pretty long-winded name. I'm just going to say Chroma Cane 2 and Chroma Cane 3. And like I said before, we're going to fix the name up here so they're nice and consistent. Chroma Cane 1. And now if I sort them, we should have 1, 2, 3 comes in nice simple orders. Don't worry about the start channel, end channel, or the controller connection. That's like the next class, next session. We're only worried about putting the props on your display and getting things named properly, and etc. That is what I was going to do for downloaded props. There's tons of choices in there. I showed you how to flip it. If you need to get a prop from a vendor that's not in the xLights download, you'd use the import, and that is going to ask you for a file off of your file system. I haven't got any examples of that tonight, but that's how you would get that into xLights. Perhaps if you got a holiday coral prop, they would have an X model file that you need in there, or you could get a prop off of the Google Drive. Maybe you 3D printed a prop and they provided an X model. It's a .x model, and that's how you'd add them in there. Just like everything else, you'd add them in there like that. So that is setting up all of your props. Double check all your naming. Everything is cool. I'm going to take this one step further, and that is adding in groups. So you have 4 mini trees. We're going to create a group of mini trees. And I'm just going to click on the first one, holding the control, clicking the second, third, and fourth. And I'm going to right click, going to create a group from those. And I'm going to call this a couple of standards. I like to call it group mini trees so that everything gets sorted properly. But you know what? Mini trees will work just as well. Because if we just say mini trees, you'll see that it comes with a little group icon and it says mini trees. So that's pretty obvious. You know, it's not a single mini tree. It's a plural. You notice the S plural for mini trees. So it keeps it all together. Another way to create the group is to click on the first one, second, third one. Again, right click, create a group of those. And those are candy canes. Notice that candy canes, plural candy canes, is not going to get mixed up with the other ones. It's because they're called candy cane 1, 2, and 3. When I click on a group at the top, you'll see that they're down here in the groups in this property box down here. Try to keep them in order, left to right, top to bottom, as long as you're consistent. If you got left to right, then keep everything left to right. So if this was in a different order, you could drag it up, I think, there you go, or drag it down. These are things you can correct later on if you find inconsistencies. So go back in your layout if you've already started working and correct these mistakes now to get them in the proper order. It'll have impacts on your sequencing later on. When something's moving across your house, it'll not follow left or right, up and down. It'll jump all over the place. So try to be as consistent as you can. I'm going to quickly throw the arches together. When you're creating groups, create the basic ones that you think you're going to need for sure. And then as you start to sequence, or as you purchase sequences or you map sequences, you may find that you have other groups that you want to create based on your vendors that you've decided to go with. Creating a groups, as you see, I just put in the models. Ideally, you don't put in groups inside of another group. It'll let you do it. Some vendors say that's okay, but xLights was not built with that in mind. It'll work, but it may not be what the vendor sequenced to. So I'm going to create a group for maybe everything. I'll call it the everything group. I'm going to, hopefully I can do it this way. I think I can. And click, shift click on the, so I clicked on the top one, shift clicked it on the bottom one. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a group from that. I'm going to call it everything. And I've created an everything group. Notice how everything turns yellow because they're all in that group. But I'm going to, because I know most vendors don't include their mega tree as everything group. They always sequence that separately. I'm just going to click that and click left, pull those out of the group. And now I have an everything group. You may create this and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to call this, move the property box up. No, I have to do here. Right click, rename. I'm going to say everything but mega tree. Or you know, you might say excluding mega tree. You could do something like that. We suggest you don't do things like what do I say? If I said group arches and candy canes, I'm going to create a group from here, call it yard props. This sort of breaks the rule I was talking about, where you created a group inside of a group. And then I could say mini trees. Some vendors say this is all right. So I'm calling that yard props. One would suggest you don't do it like that. You would actually take out arches there and choose your arches individually. So just arch 1, arch 2. So if the groups are blue, you can tell that the individual models are black. I would suggest you go back and put in the individual 4 mini trees and the 3 candy canes. I'll leave like that for now, just for the sake of time. But I would suggest you don't leave it like that. Don't worry about any of these things here. These are more advanced things. Normally, 99% of the time, you don't need to touch anything here. So I'm not going to suggest you do that. That is it for groups. I think I've covered what I want to do that. I think I've covered this as well. If you decide to rename a prop, I'm just going on my sheets here to make sure I've covered everything. If you rename a prop, you can do it all you want now. If you started sequencing, I mentioned before, it will flag it as an error. And it'll say, hey, I'm looking for Boscoio chroma cane 1. You don't have it. You say, oh, wait, it's actually called chroma cane 1, and you can fix it there. But you're going to have to do it on each and every sequence. So that's why you want to make sure that you get it right now. I am going to throw a prop on here. Say we've got a prop. This thing here, I just to cover off the obvious. I've created a prop here. I don't like it. I don't want it. I see it. I click on it. It's really simple. Just delete it. It's gone. Delete. I'm going to quickly mention this little box up here. Sometimes you're finding props. You're like, where did it go? I don't find it. I can't see it. Choose all models. That will show everything you've got defined in case you've inadvertently put it on a hidden screen or a hidden view, as they're called. You can't find it, but it's like, you know, it's there. Maybe you've got it in the all models. So just know about this option up here that you can quickly switch to it. Normally you're setting the default. We're going to click save. We probably should have done it 50 times already, but I didn't. So you always want to save, save, save. xLights is pretty good at not crashing, but when you're using layout, it is susceptible to crashing, especially if you've got a sequence open. So be sure and save as much as you want, as much as you can. Obviously, if you don't save, you're going to lose that little bit of work and you have to come back in and reapply your models. When I click save, I just want to go back to something I started the whole night off with the preferences. We clicked save. That means when we open up xLights again, it will back up this layout into your backup folder. So if you lose your show or if you deleted some props by mistake, you probably can go back to a previous copy and get it back. So that's the whole goal here with the backups. And this dropdown says never tidbit. You probably don't need never. 360 days. If you're really crazy and like using xLights every day, maybe you'd use 90 days, but you don't necessarily have to leave it at never. That's just there. Let me just check my list. I think I've covered everything in an hour and yeah. All right. I think that's what I wanted to cover. So this is the layout. You are ready to start sequencing. You're ready to try some different effects on your house, see how it looks. You can map sequences to it. You could purchase sequences. You can do all that kind of stuff. You might say, oh, you know what? I purchased some sequences and they had a prop that I never thought about. You're like, oh, I really should have, I really should have, oh, what do we got here? I want one of these. I want these really cool snowflakes. So I'm going to pop that in there because vendors are using the sequences I'm purchasing use a lot of these props. So I'm going to see how it looks on my house. So you just drop it in there and away you go. Doesn't mean you're going to purchase it. Could mean you purchase it, but this way you can see how it looks in your show without cracking open the wallet, essentially. That is basic layout in an hour. Hopefully I covered everything and you learned something. So we'll leave it now to chats and any questions.
Daryl, there was a question in chat about multiple folders for holidays. Did you want to discuss that?
Yeah, I did mention that. So we created one called show folder. You might create another one called 2022. Let me see.
You deleted that one.
Yeah, weird stuff with my, how can I do
So in the
this?
show folder, you could have separate folders for Halloween and Christmas, correct?
Yeah, you want to sort of create, and I'm going to try. So I would suggest having something called show folder, and I'm not going to type it out. I'm just going to write it out. Show folder. Then you might have one called Christmas after that, and then you might have one that called Halloween after that. Whereas show folder is a nice central spot. This is key to having the different show folders. You might even go so far as having show folder and then a year. And the order is kind of important because xLights really gets messed up if you try and change it to different orders, Christmas and then Halloween. So there's a couple of alternatives to having a different show folder with a year involved. Do not, Keith would yell at you. Keith is one of the main developers. He would yell at you if you created a show folder called 2022. Reason being, when it comes to next year and you decide to call it 2023, you've pretty much broken all of your sequences and causing yourself some grief. Keep everything in the show folder, and I shouldn't have drawn that arrow there. Keep everything in the show folder. Those are all your purchase sequences, all of your images, all of your audio, everything. Don't put anything back here. Don't put anything here. Don't put anything on your desktop, in your downloads. Everything should be in your show folder. And yeah, somebody mentioned, yeah, if you've got a show folder already, that's your Christmas or your Halloween. Yeah, there's the key files. We go through this quite a bit in the Zoom room. What do you normally do is just copy your show folder from Halloween into your Christmas and start removing props or adding props. That's a pretty common way of doing it instead of starting right from scratch.
Can you show a quick way to align those 4 Christmas trees? I know it's a highlight the 4 of them and align.
Yeah, it's probably a little tricky in this picture because they might not want to be aligned, but there's lots of tricks in the right click option, and hopefully I'm getting in the right spot. There should be an align here. I want to align the bottoms, for example. There's lots of tricks in the right click option. And you might choose here, right click. You can say distribute them. And I'm going to try horizontal. I'm probably wrong. I'm going to try vertical. And I didn't do anything. Can I align? I don't know, left. You can see lots of different choices there. Lots of tricks. When we get to this sort of thing, I made note of this. I wanted to highlight this. If you do some weird stuff with your arch and you flip it around and you think, oh, I got it looking right over here. Don't do that. Leave it always same way. And one way to check, I think, is if I look down here in size and location, look to see if you've rotated it. So if I was to flip this around here, thinking, oh, I want the green square on this side because I'm going to connect it that way. You find it's rotated somewhere. You won't even know it. one of these values is rotated, and it's going to look weird when you go to sequence it. You can zoom in with your wheel, zoom out, place your, lots of stuff like that. Feel free to come off of mute, guys, if you have any questions.
Daryl, I got a question. I had purchased a few sequences yesterday, and I've been modeling my house. And so what I've learned is to use a temporary folder to load those sequences and review which one of the props you want to use, take note of them, and then load yours back up and then import.
Yep.
I mean, this might be too advanced for this intro, but I was racking my brain because some things that were clearly labeled in that imported sequence were not available when I went to import them. They just weren't there.
When you import from somebody's sequence, you're only going to see the props that have effects on them in the import dialog. So if they had 4 candy canes, but only they only put effects on the candy cane group, you're only going to see the candy cane group in the import dialog. Would that
Correct.
be the case for you?
No, so they had windows,
Mm-hmm.
and they had ones labeled windows, but they had it under one labeled windows with all of them, and under there was windows left, windows right. There was not even a folder to import that from under the import section. It was just not there.
That could be they never had anything on the windows, right? Is that true? And
No, they had
I
it.
have to see it, I guess. Maybe we can take that offline and we'll do it after the session. Take a look at it. Speaking of windows, I didn't even think to do. There's a window frame option. It is like this, and it's very simple. Simple is same idea as a single line. It's a window frame, and it's done. It's a little less flexible in that the left and right have to be the exact same size. If they're not, and quite often when you're building these things, you don't make them exactly the same. But if your intention is to make them exactly the same, the window frame model will work quite well. Just pointing that out. They could also do window frames as part of a submodel. I didn't even touch on submodeling or anything like that. Maybe I should have. I didn't think to do that, but yeah. If you guys want to see quickly, a couple of typical submodels would be house horizontals. So you would grab all 3 of the horizontals. This is create a group. Where's my create group? Where are you hiding? Create group. And I could call that house horizontals. And then you'd have verticals. House verticals. Create a group. House verticals. And then to go the extra mile, you would say, okay, this window frame actually has a horizontal, actually has 2 horizontals and 2 verticals. And this may be what you were talking about. Maybe they've done it this way. You'd say, okay, it's a submodel. And that's how you break apart. You'd say, okay, the left side is, I'm just going to do really quick here, left side. And I'm going to add another one and call it the top. Now, left side, going back. So here you say it's the left side. You can draw, I think usually it's an imaginary box. Nope, it's actually going to show me a box today. I drew a box. There's the left side. And I'm going to draw a box around the top. And there's the top. And right side, I'm going to add, there's just a little caveat here. It's like your nugget for the day, your gemstone for the day. Here's right side is this guy. Remember I talked about top to bottom, left to right. You got to be consistent. The left side goes from pixel 1 up to pixel 50. Notice how I highlighted there, it says pixel 50. So it started at the bottom, went to the top, going to the right side now. Where's the bottom? It's 116. That is not going from the bottom to the top. That's going from the top to the bottom. So we want to be reversing the row. There we go. Now you're doing bottom to top, bottom to top. and left to right. So here's the top. It's pixel 50 over to pixel 67. We want to add one for the bottom. Like the tab key. And I'm going to highlight the bottom. And that's not a very good drawing. Let's try it again real quick. We got the bottom pixels. And it's starting at pixel 1. Then it goes 132. That doesn't look right. It's 116. We want to go left to right. So we want to go reversed. And left to right would be 132, but we also want to have the 1 right at the very beginning because we got OCD like that. So pixel 1 is the left pixel, then it's a 132 all the way down to 116. Again, following those rules of left to right, bottom to top. So everything will look nice and pretty. And click OK. I'm going to go back to my house horizontals. I'm going to go up there. And I'm going to type in window. And for my horizontal, it's going to include the bottom and it's going to include the top. My verticals are going to include the left side and the right side. So quickly, you can add all of those. So you have verticals, you got your horizontals. I'm wondering if that was the case with yours, but we'll look into that after we sign off here. Ziggy says, do you recommend duplicating the corner pixels? Depends on how you made those props. Do you actually have a pixel right at the corner? I mean, if you do, it could be included in the horizontals and in the verticals. It just means some for your sequencing, depending on how you ordered your props, whether it's going to light up as part of the horizontal or it lights up as part of the vertical. Chances are you don't even have those sequenced at the exact same time, so you could use it for both. I mean, it doesn't hurt. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't stop it from working. A lot of times we do a PVC pipe frame. There actually is no pixel right here in the center, or right there in the very corner. So you're going to want to get out your prop and take a look at it and say, does that pixel actually get included in the left and the right? And you might even tweak that right up at showtime. Once you've mounted it all on your walls or on your house, go back and verify those props and might change those counts just by 1 or 2. You say, like, oh, I put the prop on my house. I just lit up the left and it actually is, 1 pixel short. You just come right back in here, change that submodel and you re-render your sequences and you fixed it. So those are a little bit of the first kickoffs, the first parts of your show that you're going to, tweak at the last second. Now that I've done the verticals, I noted something I missed earlier. With a group, there's this red plus sign here that represents the center of that group. You can change it with these values here. That's like taking your show to the next level a little bit, tweaking it and getting those effects to show up, right where they should. Maybe that should go a little higher based on way things are. It should move. Oop, I didn't. House horizontal, house vertical. There it goes. Yeah, see how the red X is moved up there? So you could tweak that value. Probably becomes more important with some of the bigger groups. Your everything but Megatree. See where that shows up now? I'll circle around that. You want that red X to be, or that red plus sign, I guess, maybe over here, a little more center to your house. So you can tweak these numbers here to put that value, that plus sign right in here. So when you do an effect, that's going to spiral out right here. You want it to spiral right out in the middle of your house, not over in the middle of your garage, right? I'm drawing all over the screen. There you go. Anything else? Feel free, ask a question. This is on the layout. Like I said, there's controllers and sequences. There's so much more to learn.
Hey, Daryl, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Yep.
I think we've got through the most of it. And
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
raise your hands and ask questions if you need them.